The operational situation was not encouraging. Despite air support, the advance of our ground units in Tavria was insignificant. There were not enough forces to break through the enemy's defences. There was little artillery in the troops, and we did not see tanks at all. The offensive was not developed and exhausted. One day in the evening I was called to the command post. Pokrishkin, a pair with Captain Baryshnikov immediately fly to the area of Polahov and Orakov. Conduct a detailed reconnaissance, said the regiment commander. From the division reported there on the roads appeared enemy motorcyclists. The flight was to fly to the north, in the rear of the 18th Army. It was alarming. In this direction I had already had trouble when escorting bombers to Mogiev-Podolsky, and I didn't want to take Baryshnikov as wingman. He's an elderly pilot. Recently has become more cautious when carrying out combat missions. I knew that his mental state is not easy, and his behaviour sometimes bordered on the manifestation of fearfulness. However, there was a shortage of pilots and did not have to choose. We had a thorough talk and took off. We are going to Pology at an altitude of 50 meters. The sky is covered with a low solid cloud. We can see well that some of our units are moving westward on foot. Here is the artillery on horseback. This is a reinforcement of our advancing troops in the areas of Kakhovka and west of Melitopol. Pology is under us. Everything is calm here. However, I'm not left with a feeling of anxiety. The message about the appearance of motorcyclists in our rear meant a lot. By my small combat experience, I knew the principle of the enemy tank troops' offensive after their breakthrough in the rear of the defence. In front move reconnaissance units on motorcycles. Behind them strong forward units of tanks, and then the main forces. If there are motorcyclists, then, therefore, in our rear breaks through a powerful tank group, and this threatens to encircle our troops in Tavria, as it was at Nikolaev. We're heading for Orakov. We fly at an altitude of 50 meters. From this height, no motorcycle can hide from observation. But except for refugees on the roads, nobody can be seen. Approaching Orakov. The road is deserted. At a small rivulet, shell bursts. It alarmed me who is our artillery hitting. I'm making a U-turn. Once again look at the terrain. Here they are, motorcycles, camouflaged in the riverside shrubbery. There must be tanks somewhere close. In the lowlands, behind the bridge, I see our self-propelled howitzer. I enter the turn and look at it. The cabin is open and empty. There is no one near it either. I looked in the direction of Orakov, and behind us there were continuous anti-aircraft bursts. Undoubtedly, the enemy anti-aircraft gun was firing at us, and the very nature of the bursts confirmed that we were being shelled by Oerlikons. It's clear. There's an enemy in Orakov. We should scout the situation there. But we can't go at low altitude. They'll shoot us down right away. I decided to go behind the clouds, go north, and suddenly jump out to Orakov. I make a combat turn and go to the clouds. I managed to see where the wingman was. Baryshnikov took a course to our airfield. I'll have to act alone. It's even better for me. I won't have to guard my wingman. And the Oerlikons are beating relentlessly. At an altitude of 800 meters, I dropped the roll and entered the clouds. Immediately turned left about 30 degrees. To the right of me, in the direction of the previous course, were flying luminous shells. Having gone behind the clouds on Sinelnikovo, I dive to the ground and rush at high speed along the road to Orakov. The enemy's tanks and vehicles are coming along it in a continuous stream. I descend 2 or 3 meters from the ground, press close to the column, using it as a shield covering me from anti-aircraft fire. Enemy anti-aircraft gunners, fearing to hit their vehicles, can't fire cannons and machine guns obliquely. Jumped out on the northern outskirts of Orakov. There is a cluster of tanks. It's refueling. Ran close, frightened the tankers and drivers of gasoline trucks. I got out of the anti-aircraft fire zone in the lowland south of Orakov. I'm deciding where to fly next. To the airfield? No, I still need to see how our troops operate in the Kakhovka area. I'm sending the fighter there. There's fighting east of Kakhovka, but we can't see our retreating units. So they're holding firm. I turn around and fly to Melitopol. Along the front. Here is the same picture. The troops are fighting stubbornly and, apparently, do not think about withdrawal, that they can be surrounded. Took a course to the airfield. The thought of the threat of encirclement of our troops in Tavria does not leave my head. In the coming days, an avalanche of tanks from the north will cut off the escape routes of the entire southern wing of the front. Will the defending units manage to hold off the tanks, or will they surround the two armies of the southern front? Will the higher headquarters trust the data received in the reconnaissance? Will take urgent action? All these thoughts did not give rest. I landed on the airfield with a straight line and quickly approached the command post. Near it, I see the pilots of the regiment. They are waiting for cars to go to the village for dinner. The regiment commander apparently was waiting for me impatiently, went to meet me. What did you find out? Report. I can hear anxiety in his voice. It's a shitty business, comrade regimental commander. From Sinelnikov and from Zaporozhye on the roads to Orakov are moving more than 200 tanks and hundreds of cars. At Orakov, more than 100 tanks are refueling. There may be encirclement of the 18th and our 9th armies. What are you saying? That's right, comrade commander. It's worse here than at Nikolaev. Matveev. Immediately report this to division headquarters. Ivanov ordered, and he hurried to the CP to contact the commander. I was immediately surrounded by pilots. Asked about the situation. I did not keep silent. I see they thought about it. They understood what the appearance of enemy tank units in our rear would lead to. A few minutes later, the regiment commander came out to us. Do not leave for dinner. Firmly ordered Major Ivanov. Immediately fly out by squadrons to our reserve airfield in Volodarskoye. I realized that the command promptly reacted to the situation. It means that I had not flown in vain. It means that my data was fully taken into account. The next day I had to fly again to the Orakov area for reconnaissance. This flight turned out to be dramatic. I had never had such a flight in the course of the whole war. And it started like this. At dawn, the deputy commander of the Air Division, General Gill, came to our regiment. He immediately called me. I've already had to meet with this well-versed general. I thank you for yesterday's information. According to your data on the breakthrough of the 1st Tank Army of the enemy decided to withdraw our units, these words met me, General. Thank you. Perhaps our troops will not be encircled. It's hard to say how it will turn out. I'll have to fly to the Orakov area again. Now it's very important to know what the enemy is doing in this direction, where he has directed the spearhead of his blows. Instructions on the organization of the flight will give the regiment commander. Major Ivanov clarified the task, emphasized that it is necessary to scout the approach of new enemy forces. He gave specific instructions on the fulfillment of the task. You will fly in pairs. Lead with you will go Komlev, Viktor Petrovich finished. Komlev. But he has not yet really entered the ranks after returning from the hospital. Maybe let's go back to Baryshnikov. I had a very serious talk with him. No, you can't fly a reconnaissance mission with such a wingman. You know that all experienced pilots are involved in assaults. It's clear. Permission to go and prepare for departure. The appointment of Stepan Komlev as wingman worried me. The young pilot was shot down in an air battle in Moldavia, was wounded. He was treated for 3 months. All this, of course, affected his flying form. I also believed that he had not yet fully recovered from the psychological shock he received in the battle. He should have been given the opportunity to restore the technique of piloting the airplane, as well as to fly on combat missions as part of the 6. Recently, after the death of Dyachenko and the appointment of Deputy Squadron Commander Lukashevich, I have different, including inexperienced, pilots flying as wingmen. They sometimes feel constrained in combat, do not use the positive qualities of the MiG, perform maneuvers at a slower pace, do not always understand my plans. That's why at that period I felt more confident when I flew out for reconnaissance alone. Stepan Komlev, having learned that he would fly with me, was very pleased. I gave him a number of instructions, emphasized that he should look more closely at the air when we will conduct reconnaissance, and in the case of the appearance of Messerschmitts. immediately warned me by going forward, strictly keep in combat order. I myself took high responsibility for this flight. I realized that I was entrusted with reconnaissance of operational importance in the interests of the entire Southern Front. On the quality of its implementation depend on the decisions of the command. The situation revealed yesterday caused a sense of responsibility for the fulfillment of the task, but also alarmed. To accurately determine the actions of the enemy required a flight at low altitude. And this put me at a disadvantage when meeting with enemy fighters. Our pair is a convenient target in such a case, and the fact that with me comes a pilot who has a long break in combat flights forced me to think over all the options in advance. We took off, but I felt uneasy. I feared for the actions of Komlev, although we discussed possible options that could meet us in a combat flight. We go on the route. Below us and on the sides most of the terrain is covered with morning fog. On its background we are clearly visible from above, as on the screen. It is difficult for us to see what is being done on the ground. From Polog we turn to Orakov. On the road to the west there are some small columns of vehicles and artillery. A stream of refugees is moving towards them. We are descending. We see our troops rushing. I understand they are coming to create a barrier to the enemy's tank wedge. Our forces are small, but they are marching firmly, not stretching out. They are coming to stand to the death. Again, we're going to the middle height. East of Malaya Tokmachka, near the forest plantations, we can see our large caliber guns. They are firing in the direction of Orakov. Here is the western edge of the village. Yesterday I saw rifle units digging trenches here. Today I can see a solid trench occupied by fighters. Will they have enough strength to repel the enemy tanks? And ahead, closer to Orakov, already the enemy. Tanks with crosses on their sides, cars are visible. They are sprawling through forest plantations, mown fields. Orakov is full of military equipment. Yes, a lot of forces at the enemy. Bypassing anti-aircraft batteries, we are going to Zaporozhye. On the roads to the south there are tanks, cars, guns again. We turned around for the return route. I look carefully, trying to memorize on the terrain of the enemy columns, their composition, direction of movement. Komlev at energetic maneuvers sometimes breaks away from me, then again takes the battle order. Here is already Orakov behind, soon our defense in Malaya Tokmachka. The situation on the ground causes anger at the enemy, and this feeling does not always lead to reasonable actions. I decided to hit with ERAs and machine gun the vehicles on the road before coming out to our own. I put the plane into dive and looked in the direction of Komlev. He's not behind me. I'm looking for him. There he is, above and ahead. He's heading east. And behind him, a couple of Messerschmitts. They might catch up. Vigorously take the plane out of dive, lighten the propeller, give afterburner, rush after the enemy pair. I look ahead, keeping an eye on Komlev. Why doesn't he turn on the engine afterburner? Then he would have been able to get away from the enemy. Now I wanted to tell Stepan that at these moments. That's what Komlev's unpreparedness to act in difficult situations of combat flight was saying. How could I foresee that he did not know this simple truth? And the enemy pair is already in the tail of the MiG. In seconds they'll open fire. We must save Komlev. The distance to the Messerschmitts is still long, but we can't wait any longer. I'm launching ears. It whizzes by. I'm launching a second one. Again, no hit. However, a shell with a firing tail passed so close to the wingman of the pair that frightened him. He immediately turned his plane up, and I'm catching up with the lead. From him to Komlev's plane already stretched smoke machine gun trails. There's no time to lose. Immediately I open fire, and a long burst pierced the Messer. Smoke burst out of it. It somehow settled down, but it is still on its course. I continue to shoot at it and further. In these seconds, I almost crashed into a burning enemy plane. Suddenly, a machine gun burst hit the engine of my MiG. I threw the fighter to the right, below the track. A Messer flew over my head. In my haste to save Komlev, I did not notice the second pair of the enemy on the right. They threw a line into my plane. The engine immediately gave a brake. The speed dropped sharply. The 3 remaining Messerschmitts, built in a chain, began to go into the tail of my MiG. There was nothing to think about active combat now. There was nowhere to wait for help. We have to rely only on ourselves, on the ability to get out from under the blows. I understand I have to pull to my troops at Malaya Tokmokshka. That's where my salvation lies. Enemy pilots, confident of victory, will try to kill me to increase the number of downed planes. In these seconds I gathered all my will and self-control in a fist and prepared for manoeuvring. There was only this opportunity left. Turned from behind the armour backrest facing the approaching messers. I watched them wolf pack overtake me, go into the tail of the damaged MiG. I have to catch the moment of opening fire of the Mi-109 and sharply go under the track. The main thing is not to allow aiming fire, especially cannon fire. The manoeuvre cannot be done earlier. The delay is tantamount to death. Here is already approaching the first messer. I'm keeping my eyes open. He is at the sighting distance of opening fire. At the same moment I throw the fighter with a slide down and to the side. The fiery trace passes above, and immediately the enemy plane rushes over me. I see it off with a glance. He again returns to the stretched-out chain of planes. The second one comes in to attack. Everything repeats. But either I was a little late with the throw of the MiG, or he opens fire earlier bullets fractionally beat on the armoured back, as if a hammer pounded. But my airplane is alive. So repeats over and over again the firing on the MiG, and I'm getting away from the enemy's fire. I glance at the altimeter. Gradually losing altitude with each departure from the track, and I need it so badly to reach my own. Just before I hit the ground, the engine stalled. I level the plane and go to land, on my stomach. In the field of vision the ground, a railroad box, a girl drives a cow with a rod. Such a peaceful picture, and suddenly a shot of bullets on the armoured back. But it is impossible to dive under the track the ground does not allow. Explosions are heard in the airplane, and it, with broken control, goes to the ground. Rumble. My head hits the dashboard and I lose consciousness. I vaguely hear the rumble of engines above me. I wake up with a sharp pain in my head. My temples ache, my face hurts. I lifted my head, looked up into the sky. A trio of Messerschmitts is turning around in a chain to attack the immovable MiG. They want to burn on the ground, flashed a thought. It seems that I pissed them off so badly that they don't leave the downed one alone. I realize that I have to leave the plane immediately. With difficulty I unbuckle straps and parachute straps. I try to get up, and I can't. Some kind of fog comes over my eyes. In a semi-fainting state, I fall over the side of the cabin. I fall headfirst onto the wing. I see drops of blood and feel that my right eye can't see anything. That's it. The eye is blown out, and I can't fly anymore. Such bitterness and resentment clench my soul. Is it really the end of my flying? I crawl away from the plane. My consciousness is stirred by the question, where did I land? With us, or with the Germans the Messerschmitts are diving overhead? Now there will be a line on the airplane, and on me. Not far away at the crossing I see a bridge. With difficulty I get up and run to it. It is necessary to hide. I went under the planking in time. Nearby there were bumps from shells. I have to think about self-defense. I take my pistol out of the holster and load it. Once in Moldova, afraid of captivity, I almost hurried to shoot myself. Now I know that I should not be in a hurry. It is necessary to understand the situation, and then make a decision. I listen. There's no one nearby, and Messerschmitts are already leaving, having failed to set fire to my MiG. I came out of hiding. I looked around. There's a house nearby. A railroader lives there. I go to it. A view of the village opens up. An old woman is rushing towards me, crying, and her hands are shaking. My hostess. Is this Malaya Tokmokshka? Are there any more of us in the village? I ask her. Tokmokshka. Ours are here, the Soviets. They are fighting the Germans on the other side of the village. She showed her hand to the western outskirts of the village. Now I heard the explosions of shells and the crackle of machine guns. Still at their own. I felt more cheerful. But only my bloodshot eyes could not see anything, and it bothered me. If you'd be so kind. Bring some water. I need to wash the blood off my face. The woman quickly got a bucket of water from the well and poured it on my head and palms. I opened my eyes. I can see both of them. Good. My eyes are safe. I'll fly. I'll pay the Nazis back. I'm thinking out loud. Where's the good? Your whole face is wounded, says the lady of the house with bemusement. Everything will heal. Where can I find a doctor and get bandaged? She showed me the house where the medical center is located. I'm going there and myself thinking about how to lift and take out the MiG. Explosions of shells and mines, shooting from rifles and machine guns intensified. Clearly the battle is close by. It was unknown how it would end, but it was necessary to take the airplane away and get out of here faster. It was possible to foresee the further development of events on our part of the front, and I wanted to get back to the regiment with my MiG, even if it was pierced. Here, at the front edge of the defence, I had the opportunity to see for the first time the work of the medical station. The wounded were brought to the shed, near which piles of bloody bandages were lying. Inside the shed, groans and screams could be heard. Here first aid was rendered. The bandaged were put on wagons and taken to the rear. Orderlies carried out on stretchers and put the dead in a row on the spread straw behind the barn. They no longer needed medical help. I stood and looked at this terrible picture, not daring to enter the shed. An elderly orderly in a bloody coat came up to me. Comrade pilot, what are you waiting for? Let's go to the infirmary. The doctors will give you help. No. I'll wait when it will be freer, I answered him, feeling that my conscience does not allow me to go to the dressing before these maimed soldiers. Come on. As long as the battle is going on, the wounded will be brought here all the time, the orderly repeated insistently. Our conversation was interrupted by a shell explosion. The nearest house collapsed on its side. Soon 2 soldiers, holding a boy of about 7 years old, with a ripped belly, were brought there. The child's blue face was marked by wide-open eyes. In them were frozen surprise, and as it seemed to me, a reproach to us, the adults who allowed such a thing. I have seen a lot of suffering, experienced the death of comrades in arms. But this, probably, I will not forget for the rest of my life. Hatred for the enemy squeezed me into a lump. Thirst for revenge against the fascists for the suffering of our people seized me. In the reproach seen in the eyes of the child, I felt my guilt, the guilt of the soldiers of the army who allowed the enemy on our land. Quickly, we must return to the regiment and take revenge on the fascist killers for all the misfortunes they had brought us. I turned around to leave, but I was stopped by a nurse. Here in the yard, she washed the wound and bandaged it. I moved towards the front line of defence. Soon I met a sergeant and asked him to escort me to the command post of the unit. Under the whistling fragments of mines and shells, we were sneaking along a shallow trench. Get down, the sergeant warned me. You won't surprise anyone with your heroism here. Do you want your head to be torn off? The censure passed my consciousness. A kind of indifference to my own safety took hold of me. Must have been the stress of the morning. Here's the CP. I introduced myself to the regiment commander. He was standing at the embrasure, with binoculars. He turned to me and asked, "Was it you who were killed by the Messerschmitts?" Me, but I'll pay them back for it. I ask you to help me pull out the plane that was hit. Don't worry. We'll repel the tank attack and we'll help you. Sit down. Have a rest. He turned toward the battlefield again. Half an hour later, there was relative silence. The commander breathed a sigh of relief. A smile appeared on his tired face. The Krauts have been pissed off. A dozen tanks were set on fire and hit. Now soon they won't be able to attack. Chief of Staff, give him a car and soldiers. Well, and you, pilot, hurry up and get your plane while there's a lull. Briefly told the commander about the data received during the reconnaissance. Thanking him for his help, I asked for a couple of bottles of fuel mixture. There were a lot of them in a box in the corner of the control center. Take it. If you can't get the plane out, burn it. Keep in mind that in the middle of the night we'll start our withdrawal topology. A dozen minutes later we arrived at the airplane and started to lift it. The enemy immediately opened mortar fire on us, firing from large caliber machine guns. We had to turn around and hide behind the houses. The plane was lying 400 meters from the front edge of the defense, in an open field, and there was nothing to think about working in the daylight. As soon as darkness fell, observing light camouflage and silence, our group again began to lift the plane. However, despite the efforts, 24 soldiers were not enough to lift the 3-ton MiG by the wing. And the situation was in a hurry. To the right of the position of the regiment, in the direction topology, came the incessant rattle of moving tanks. Tomorrow morning they will strike at the flank and rear of the regiment. What to do? I allowed the soldiers to have a smoke break, and myself once again went around the MiG, thinking about how best to solve the problem. At this time came the officer. The regiment begins to withdraw. The regiment commander ordered to finish the work and let the soldiers go. And burn the airplane, he said harshly. I was even confused. What do you mean, burn the airplane? It was opposed by the consciousness of military duty. The airplane is my personal weapon. To return to my unit without a combat vehicle, and we have them in the regiment and already few cannot. What to do? Have all possibilities been exhausted? Up to now we have been acting on the principle that we have the strength, but we don't need brains. And if there are not enough forces to lift the airplane, we must look for another way. At this critical moment, and came up with the idea of digging under the wings and release the landing gear. 10 soldiers did this work in a few minutes, and now my MiG is standing on its feet. We quickly secured its tail in the back of a 3-ton truck, and Zeus with the airplane on a semi-trailer drove out on the road. I was left with a sergeant and 2 soldiers to accompany me. We drove all night. It was not an easy way. I had to keep my eyes open. There were a lot of obstacles along the sides of the road. In the morning, when passing through the village, we were stopped by a herd of cows. The wings of the MiG blocked the whole street, and we had to wait for the herd to bypass the airplane. At the side of the car, leaning on the gate, stood and looked at us middle-aged woman. What a sad look she had. What a longing look she saw us off with. Comrade Senior Lieutenant, we should ask this woman for something to eat, the sergeant whispered in my ear, bending over from the body into the cabin. We haven't eaten anything since yesterday. And I was hungry. I had not taken anything in my mouth for more than 24 hours. I approached the woman. Hello, lady of the house. Can I get something to eat from you? We have plenty of food. We're living well now. But who's going to get it all? So our army is leaving, and you're leaving us for the Germans. Let's go to the cellar. The well-deserved reproach of a peasant woman, whose husband and sons are probably fighting somewhere, made me feel ashamed. My legs became leaden, my feet were stuck to the ground. Shame for our helplessness prevented me from going to get food for the team. Turning around, I quickly walked to the car and jumped into the cabin under the surprised looks of the soldiers. What are you standing there? Start quickly, shouted at the driver. The woman mother and her grief did not leave my memory until the day of the Bologna. How rightly she said only people began to live happily, and then an enemy invasion. By the middle of the day we arrived at the square of the town of Polohi. Here we drove the car aside, and without disturbing anyone, began to detach the wing planes. It is necessary to save them from damage during further movement. I had skills in unpacking the plane. Work as a mechanic before the army, senior aircraft technician in honor, instilled the ability to competently handle a variety of equipment. The sergeant and the soldiers deftly helped. Quickly disconnected, stacked and fastened the wings between the tail of the MiG and the sides of the car body. Now we can worry about ourselves. The pain in the wound was getting worse. I didn't have to look for a hospital for a long time. It was right there, on the square. The doctor listened to my request and ordered the nurses to remove the bandages. They peeled off the dried gauze, washed the wounds on my forehead, and removed pieces of glass from the broken flight goggles. You must go to bed for treatment, or you may lose an eye. I can't, doctor. There's an airplane outside the hospital. We can't abandon it. And we've got to get out of here fast. I don't understand you. I had to briefly describe the situation. The doctor asked me how I got wounded. After listening, he ordered a bandage and a tetanus shot. The nurses, while dressing me, told me that yesterday they also received a wounded pilot. He landed near Holloway. What is his last name? Where is he now? I asked. One of the nurses went to look at the book of wounded in the emergency room. It was Junior Lieutenant Komlev, she reported. In the evening he was sent to the rear. Do you know him? Asked the doctor. This is my partner. It turns out that Stepan and I were both hit. Your comrade was lightly wounded and obeyed us, went for treatment. But you're stubborn and don't want to lie down, they reproached me. I can't, Doctor. I have to save the plane and get out of here faster. I don't advise you to stay here too long. The tanks are bypassing Pology. We're waiting for the transport that took the wounded yesterday to return. We have to take everyone who went to the hospital. We can't leave them behind. I once again advised the medics to take urgent measures to remove the wounded and evacuate the hospital. At those moments I did not realize that my advice, as well as my departure, were already late. When I returned to the airplane, I saw that the soldiers accompanying me were in a depressed mood. What's wrong? Get in the car and let's go. And where to go? They say the enemy has broken through to the east. The roads are cut by tanks there, said the sergeant. Where did you get this information? The cars came back from there. The soldiers told me how they ran into the tanks and barely escaped. The sergeant pointed to the cars standing on the square. They showed up while I was bandaging. The message was discouraging. If the enemy tanks in the Kuybyshev area intercepted the road to Volodarskoye, then where to go? There was still an open way to the south, to the Sea of Azov. There, perhaps, the enemy's advanced units had not had time to reach. Don't think about it, but there's only one way out. I decide to go south. The sooner we get to the sea, the more hope to meet there the troops retreating from Melitopol and make our way with them to Mariupol. Get in the car. Start it up. Gave orders to his small team. The driver pointed out the road on which our way lay. It was more convenient to drive the airplane with the removed wings. There was less interference from oncoming and passing traffic. In this relatively calm atmosphere, I involuntarily thought about the reasons for the failure in the last flight. How is it that we did not notice the attack of Messerschmitts? Komlev, responsible for the search for the enemy in the air, watched them. But it's my fault too. I relied too much on my partner, did not take into account his little combat experience. When attacked by enemy fighters, the wingman's behavior was wrong. Instead of warning about Messers, to keep near me, he decided to go to the east. At the same time, he did not use the engine afterburner and allowed the enemy pair to catch up with him. With such mistakes in combat flight, in a poorly prepared technically and tactically pilot I have already had to meet more than once. Now they were made by Komlev. I am also good. Performing such an important task, could not resist, rushed to storm the enemy column. The command was waiting for me to reconnaissance data, and I get out of the encirclement with a downed airplane. I'll never forgive myself for that mistake. Apparently I had not formed the necessary qualities in my character, which would restrain me from hasty decisions. I was tormented by thoughts about the further fate of Stepan Komleva. Did the transport with wounded from Pologsky evacuation hospital manage to get through, or was it intercepted by the enemy somewhere? We already knew that fascists do not take wounded Soviet soldiers prisoner, they destroy them on the spot. It began to get dark when we arrived at Verkhnitokmak station. It was full of vehicles and wagons. In some places along the streets, pressed up against the houses, were artillery guns, but there were no shell crates visible on the tractors. Powerful guns and howitzers were now unafraid of the enemy. With difficulty found the leaders of this confused mass of troops. I introduced myself to the senior commander. He stood at the table with a map. Around the officers, looked at me, asked, "Pilot?" "Yes," with a downed airplane. "Well, come on, join us. We'll break through together." The meeting continued. I realized that my hopes to get ahead of the enemy, to get to the sea, were not justified. The enemy's tank units had already captured the town of Osipenko. It remained only to break through to the east together with the units gathered in Verkhney Tokmak. And the commanders behaved calmly, confidently. They made reasonable suggestions, deeply and accurately analysed the situation. All this gave faith in the success of the night raid through the enemy barriers. The Council of Commanders decided to go to the breakthrough at 1 o'clock in the morning, established the order of movement of units, outlined other measures to organise the breakthrough. Soon I returned to the car on the northeastern outskirts of the station. We drove up to one of the huts. The hostess met us cordially, invited us to come into the yard, grilled meat of a sheep killed in the bombing. After a dense dinner, I determined who and when will stand at the post at the airplane, warned about the departure of troops to the breakthrough at 1 o'clock in the morning, and ordered to wake me up in advance. Before that I had not slept for 2 days. As soon as I lay down, I fell dead asleep. When I opened my eyes, it was light outside the window. I immediately jumped out of the house. Anxiety in my soul. The Z's with the airplane was standing, and the whole place was empty. That's it. I overslept. I thought in despair. The soldiers, without waking up, went to the breakthrough with the troops. I rushed to the car, jumped on the wheel. My escorts were sound asleep in the back, under the tail of the plane. I roused them, scolded them like criminals. The soldiers only looked at me guiltily with sleepy eyes and kept silent. In the first minutes I could not concentrate, decide what to do, how to correct the mistake. It was already impossible for us to catch up with the troops that had left for the breakthrough 4 hours late. But the despair that seized me forced me to rush after the units along the breakthrough route. We passed several landing strips east of the station. We saw the place where the units were breaking through at night, craters from mines and shells, broken equipment. Here I really thought about it. It was foolish to go further with 3 men, almost unarmed. Somewhere we would run into the enemy and we would be easily killed. We must look for another way, look for companions to get out of the encirclement. We listened. In the east there is silence, and to the west of us we can hear frequent bursts of shells, artillery firing. Apparently ours are still fighting there. That's where we should move. There is salvation there. Once again we looked around the area. Not far from the road were abandoned wagons and a car. We approached them, examined them. We found a hand machine gun with loaded discs, 2 semi-automatic rifles and grenades. I armed myself like a real infantryman. We approached a semi-truck. It had no external damage, but the engine would not start. We blew the gasoline pipe and the carburetor with a pump, and the car started. I got behind the wheel. We drove in the opposite direction. We crossed Verkhney Tokmak and soon came to Chernigovka. From here we saw that our cannons were firing in the forests to the west. We immediately went there. I introduced myself to a senior artilleryman and asked to give us the opportunity to go for a breakthrough from the encirclement. You'd better contact the army headquarters. They are planning a breakthrough. Our task for now to cover with fire the withdrawal of units. In the army headquarters, hastily loaded on cars, iron boxes and safes. A fire was blazing, burning papers. One of the officers, stopping for a second, threw a few words, "Gather everyone on the northern outskirts of the village." Soon the concentration was finished, and the signal flare gave the command to leave. Cars of the headquarters in motion lined up in a long column. Behind them we were attached. Behind us self-propelled guns. A column of wagons was being built in parallel. We moved to the east, to the forest plantations. Suddenly the way ahead was blocked by mine explosions, traces of machine gun fire. We turned the column to the right. But even from there, from the plantations, we were met by intensive fire from mortars and machine guns. We returned to the northern part of Chernigovka. Some of the vehicles went down to the ravine that was next to the village. Poorly prepared breakthrough did not take place, and the situation is unclear. And the enemy continued to periodically bombard the cluster of units from mortars. To suppress the enemy's mortar batteries, our artillery had no shells. We are standing, waiting for new orders. My team took refuge from mine splinters behind the wall of a hut, located nearby. The chauffeur offered me to go behind the wall from the car cabin. But I stayed where I was. Though I am not a fatalist, but what fate predetermined will happen. In a few minutes I saw the cars of the headquarters ahead. I decided to check the situation, and the shelling intensified. Mortars continuously hit the village. It was dangerous to go, but I was indifferent to the situation. Suddenly I bumped into a lieutenant general. Tall, statuesque, he excitedly walks alone along the landing. I guess that this is the commander of the 18th Army. I greet him. The general looks at me questioningly with red, inflamed from dust and sleep deprivation eyes. A pilot? How did you get here? I was on a reconnaissance mission near Orekov. I was shot down. What should I do with the plane? On the other side of the landing, Air Chief, General Goryunov. Ask him, said the commander. I went there. I saw among the scattered crates a group of military men with aviation buttonholes on their uniforms. They were burning staff documents on the fire. I was glad to meet aviators. I hoped to get here a reasonable advice of senior aviation chiefs about the further fate, about the airplane. Today, participating in the breakthrough attempts, I myself realized that MiG must be destroyed. I can hardly break through the enemy barrier with it. It constrains the movement, interferes with the surrounding transport. However, to be sure, I wanted to hear the advice of experienced people. Seeing a full, small-height Major General, I introduced myself and addressed him. Comrade General, I was sent to you by the Army Commander. Report. What are you worried about? He asked, looking at me with tired eyes. I told him about the reconnaissance, about my ordeal with the downed airplane, and asked his advice about the further fate of the MiG. You know what I'll advise you, Senior Lieutenant, burn the plane. And if you manage to get out of here, thank fate. I see. But it's a pity about the airplane. It can be repaired and we can fight again. Don't hesitate. We'll break through at night and he'll be in the way. You'll get separated from the column and you won't get out of the encirclement. What to do? I drove my wounded MiG to the straw pile. Lit it up. It was sad and painful to look at the burning airplane. I fought on it for 3 months. It helped me many times in the area of Mogilev-Podolsk and here in Orekov. Immediately I decided to drive with my team to the southern outskirts of Chernigovka. There were no our units here. I had to get something to eat and stock up on food for the road. I sat behind the wheel of a semi-truck with soldiers in the back. We are driving along the outskirts of the village. Suddenly, from behind the outermost house, a long queue sounded. Bullet trails passed close to the cabin. Rapid reaction saved me. I sharply rushed the car into the courtyard of the house, and out of the door, towards us, a woman. She's wailing. Why did you come here? Go away quickly. There are Germans behind the house. Go away, or they'll burn our house too. I make a sharp turn, and under machine gun bursts we rush to the northern outskirts of the village. Only there we caught our breath. We decided to starve, but not to take any more risks. In the evening, a dozen of ambulances entered the village. All of us involuntarily paid attention to them. The red crosses on the sides stood out sharply. Doctors and nurses came out. Among them I recognized the doctor and sisters who bandaged me in the advanced evacuation hospital in Pologi. I came up and said hello. Didn't have time to leave earlier? And how are the wounded? We barely got away. Only a part of the medical staff and wounded were saved, the doctor told me without raising his eyes. And as if justifying himself, he finished, and what could we do? The cars that left earlier did not return. If it is possible, make a bandage. My eyebrow hurts, I asked. The nurses took bags and alcohol out of their bags and peeled off the dried bandage. The doctor examined the wound. It's all right. The eye is intact and the wound is healing. The words the cars did not return excited me. Did Komlev and a group of wounded manage to slip to the rear? And if they ran into German tankers? God forbid to be there. I'm going to my group. The bodies are full of soldiers. They're afraid to leave their vehicles before the breakthrough, waiting for night. I'm thinking that in my condition, it'll be hard to drive a semi at night, without roads. Do any of you know how to drive? I turn to the soldiers. I am a chauffeur of the second class, says one of them. Good. Inspect the car, prepare it for the hard road. It's getting dark. On the field east of the village began to concentrate units, vehicles and artillery. I decided to move forward to the breakthrough line. We're moving out to the forward chains. They are ready to attack. We were followed by a column of medics, dozens of other vehicles. I find that there is no 3-ton with a sergeant. I look around the column, no sign of him. Did he fall behind, or did he decide to get out of the encirclement on his own? We had a sharp conversation with him before we reached the breakthrough point. When the rumour spread among the soldiers that the situation is almost hopeless and there is nothing to hope for, the sergeant said to me, "Our case is bad. We must go out in our own way." "What do you mean, in our own way? I don't get it." "Let's change into civilian clothes. I already went out near Kiev." "What are you saying?" I was indignant. For such talk. Now neither he nor the car was around. Did he get cold feet and ran away? And the officers were already building a column, preparing rifle units to attack the forest belt, where the enemy's barricades lurked. Colonel, leading the breakthrough, gave the command to attack, and the front ranks of soldiers silently ran forward. Then hung in the air flares of the enemy, and from the forest belt stretched to the fleeing soldiers trails of glowing bullets. The chains lay down. Our column stopped. Several officers directly in the chain lifted the soldiers. I heard exclamations, "Why did they lie down? So all will be killed." Forward to the attack first separate groups, and then all the units rose and rushed at the enemy. The blinding light of rockets, bullet trails and bursting mines again pinned the soldiers to the ground. Only a few soldiers continued to crawl toward the landing. The movement had come to a standstill. But it is understandable. The bulk of the soldiers in the chain from the rear units, they have not been in real trouble, not fired upon. They're lying down under bullet trails. We can't break through that way. I jumped off the step, stepped forward and waited for the chain to rise to the attack, to go in its ranks. The colonel saw me illuminated by rockets and shouted, "Pilot, let's go forward, behind the armoured car." I gave a hand command to the driver of our half-truck and a group of soldiers. "Forward. Follow me." Clinging to the armoured car, we rushed to the forest belt, towards the glowing traces of machine guns. The feeling of fear of enemy fire disappeared. Everyone was seized by the desire to run to the enemy in the forest belt and destroy him, just to get there. I guess that's what happens during a bayonet attack. It is necessary to run forward, only forward, not paying attention to the whistle of bullets, to the falling comrades. Those who do not waver, do not turn back, win. Such a feeling embraced me and the whole group, the whole chain. The German barrier in the forest belt was destroyed, the road was free. Our small column of vehicles with fighters running alongside rushed on. Armoured car, firing, went along the landing, suppressing machine guns on the flank. I returned to the car, looked around. Ahead of us, a little to the right, in the faint light of the crescent moon loomed the hill. It was crossed by a forest belt, and a trigonometric tower was visible from above. Not reaching the height, I decided to stop and wait for the main column. I barely heard the scraping of tracks of self-propelled guns. Apparently they were more than a kilometre behind us. I did not want to break away from the column in a small group. It's dangerous. I realize that now it is necessary to take the initiative and make a decision. The colonel who led the breakthrough is not around. I decide that we will move through the height. Perhaps there are field roads there. However, it is favourable to place firing points on the heights. The enemy can use the height. I'm sending 4 soldiers with automatic rifles to reconnoitre. And the main column is getting closer. Hear the work of engines in a few hundred metres. Finally appears and 4 soldiers. They report that there is no enemy at the height. "Let's go." I give a command to the driver. "Keep the direction to the tower." The car was just about to start as the engine whined and stalled. The group following me, bypassing us, moved forward. All the companions from our truck were blown away by the wind. They caught up with the cars leaving us and climbed into them, already fully packed with soldiers. We were left alone in the dark, in the middle of the field. "Give me the pump and open the hood." I shouted to the driver. We must not delay. It took minutes to blow out the gasoline pipe, carburetor, and start the engine. Just moved, as from the landing at altitude suddenly hit the column of machine gun bursts. Immediately the front cars burst into flames. It became as bright as daylight. "Stop." I ordered the chauffeur, but I was thinking what to do. I look at the burning cars at the trigonometric tower. I see that part of the group is going back. Didn't the soldiers sent to the height inspect it? In the mind did not fit the criminal attitude to the order given, outraged by their false report that the Germans are not there. Or maybe a small group of the enemy had just taken up a position. I myself fulfilled my duty conscientiously and honestly, and I believe that others had the same attitude. The approaching vehicles huddled around our half-truck. The enemy transferred the fire on the accumulation of vehicles. We must do something, otherwise they would burn the vehicles and kill people. I looked around once more. I see a dark hole to the left of the field. Clearly the light from the burning cars doesn't reach there. I guess that it's a gully and we should move further along it. Go left, into the valley. I command the driver. We drive down into the darkness. The whole group is following us. The machine gun tracks are higher now. They're not scary. I decided that we should wait for the main column and show it how to bypass the ambush. I went out a little back, listened. The cars are still far away. I involuntarily thought about the vicissitudes of fate. I gained respect for our semi-truck, which we picked up on the road near Reconnaissance. It had saved us from death more than once. Yes, the cars of the evacuation hospital went to the heights. The first lines hit them, and now they are burning on the hill. Probably the nurses and doctors were killed. At the head of the column I saw a colonel I knew. He is standing on the step, looking at the road. There's an ambush to the right on the heights. It is better to direct the column along the ravine. Bypassing it, I shouted to him. Good. Let's go forward. He commands the driver. The experienced officer, apparently, without my advice it was clear that it was impossible to move through the hill. There were burning cars. All the units passed through the lowland without losses. Without stopping we moved eastward, bypassing the settlements occupied by the enemy. Soon we came to Burda. In total darkness we crossed the river. Only one gun, having got a wheel in a hole, fell on the side. We moved all day, almost without stops. In the evening we encountered a column of enemy motorcyclists. In the heat of the fight several tanks came to their aid, but ours fought bravely and repulsed the attack. Soon we moved to the forest where was our airfield. From here I flew out for the last time on reconnaissance to Orikov. I decided to stop there, in case I met some of my people. We drove out to the airfield. It was empty. The regiment and the bow had left here. Where to? Where to look for them? Maybe the inhabitants of the nearest village where the pilot spent the night know about it. But first we had to stock up on fuel. We were already riding on the last litres in the afternoon. Empty barrels were lying at the gas warehouse in the woods. But to our joy, one large tank buried in the ground was filled with aviation gasoline. We found Alvear in the warehouse, filled the tank of the car, and took 2 barrels as a reserve. We drove up to the vehicles of the headquarters. Found a senior, reported the tanker with fuel. It's very useful. Drive forward and show the way, he said, and gave a command to the chauffeurs to follow me. 3 hours later the tank was empty. We were not alone in the forest. Several retreating regiments were concentrated here. In Mariupol already dominated Hitlerites, and the commanders of the units decided to break through at night to the northeast, bypassing the city. With the onset of darkness the units began to pull out of the forest and take the direction to the city of Stalin. Night breakthrough, movement on country roads, bypassing the settlements occupied by the Germans, observance of strict light camouflage, all this was very hard work. We had to drive with headlights off, orienting ourselves by a white sheet of paper pasted on the back of the body of the car ahead of us. In the first half of the day the columns reached Starobeshchev. Here our troops were firmly defended. Having surrendered my travelling companions by car to the disposal of the military unit, and having a little rest, by evening I found the headquarters of our army. The commander instructed me the next morning to leave for Taganrog, where our regiment was based, and also to tow there on a trailer and his damaged car. Early in the morning we set off. I drove on my semi-truck, fully loaded with wooden stakes from tents, and with a passenger car hitched on a cable. I was surprised by this load. We are losing towns and villages, factories and collective farms, but we are saving stakes that nobody needs and that are only good for firewood. Lamenting, I did not suppose that the overloading of a half-truck, which had seen the likes of it, would turn out to be a salvation for me. Though we moved without stops, but obviously we did not manage to get to Taganrog in daylight time. The loaded car was barely crawling, and with the onset of darkness we decided to stand the night bombers of the enemy began to operate over the road. They were dropping bombs on the cars driving with lights on. We approached the village of Pokrovsko. We settled down on its outskirts in the house of a railroad worker. We only fell asleep as a loud knock on the door raised everyone. We grabbed our weapons and opened the door. Officers in NKVD uniforms came in. Whose cars are at the house? They looked at us sternly. Fine. We're going to Taganrog. We spent the night here. We didn't dare to go in the dark, I answered. To Taganrog? The Germans are there. You're lucky you didn't go further. The southern half of the village has already been captured by the enemy. We must leave immediately. I'm thinking of a direction. Isn't the road to Rostov intercepted? No. Leave here immediately. We're blowing up the elevator and leaving too. We got to Rostov without much trouble. Soon I found my regiment in Batarsk. I presented myself to the regiment commander. Welcome back. Didn't the Germans kill you completely? Smiling, Major Ivanov asked. It was obvious that he was glad to see me back. They tried, but failed. And your eye, is it intact? My eyebrow was broken, but my eye was intact. Good, so you'll be flying and fighting. We knew you'd come back. We've been waiting. Have a rest here in Bataisk. After such an odyssey you need to heal. And then come to us, to Sultan Seyli. The regiment will be relocated there. I experienced a lot of hard things in just 1 week, but the meeting with pilots and technicians of the regiment dispelled gloomy thoughts. At the aircraft parking lot met Andrei Trude. Smiling, he greeted me. Comrade Senior Lieutenant, where did you swap the MiG for this shabby motorized truck? Looking at his smiling face, I felt even warmer. Still the same. A joke and a kind teasing first of all. My friend Andrei, this half-truck saved me 3 times. The commander himself assigned it to me. You could say a personal car. Pilots and technicians immediately surrounded us, asked us to tell about our ordeal. I had to mentally go through the days and nights of this hard week again, to tell about the experience. I am remembering, and myself thinking about the slave. Do they know anything about him? I couldn't stand it, I asked. But the regiment knew nothing about Stepan Komlev. The sanitary unit took me seriously. They cleaned the wound, removed pieces of glass. But I was in a bad mood. I did not feel well away from combat work, from friends. I was drawn to them. I saw how steadfastly, honestly and bravely my comrades in arms performed their duty in a difficult combat situation. I physically felt the need to get involved in combat work faster. On the 3rd day I couldn't stand it. I went to Sultan Seyli in my personal semi-truck. The mood of the pilots was not cheerful. Squadron Commander Konstantin Ivichov and his wingman Sergeant Ivan Dengub did not return from a combat mission. And on the next day Kuzma Selivastov, who flew on I-16 to search for this pair, died. Only much later we learned that Selivastov alone fought with 4 Mi-109s. In this unequal battle on an obsolete airplane, Kuzma was shot down. He was buried near the airfield, from which he flew his last combat flight. Days will pass, and I'll come to his grave. I will stand and think about this patriot of our fatherland, and about many other pilots who died in battles with the enemy. How many graves have modest obelisks, and how many more unknown heroes? That day, after experiencing sorrowful moments, I came to the control room. I asked to be included in the combat work. Viktor Petrovich looked at me and firmly said, "No, Pokrishkin. You will have another task to retrain young pilots from I-16 to MiGs. It is necessary to prepare them to fight on the new equipment." I didn't agree, I objected. I wanted to fight the enemy. But Viktor Petrovich stood his ground. "Don't be stubborn. You know that an experienced pilot should teach. Until your eye is healed, I will not allow you to fly combat missions." The commander, as always, was right. It was a little early for me to get involved in combat work. I said goodbye to my friends, took the young pilots and went to the place of gathering to Zernograd. For the second time during the war, one was entrusted with the training of young people. I was driving, and my thoughts were overwhelming. I realized that I had taken on a difficult task. There is not much time, but the task is difficult. The main idea was maturing to pass on to young people everything that the war has taught, to focus on the formation of those moral, political and military qualities that make a pilot a fighter. Of course, we will master the technique, teach pilots to pilot the MiG. We still need to help them gain self-confidence, to teach them to critically analyze the results, to cultivate a constant desire for improvement, constant dissatisfaction with what has already been done. And can we be satisfied now, even a major victory in the air? The enemy is still trampling our land, and as long as he holds a weapon in his hands, he must be exterminated. Zernograd welcomed our group warmly and affectionately. The weather was sunny and bright. The last days of Indian summer, spiders were pulling their threads in the air, autumn-coloured trees and bushes. All this relaxed me, pulled me to rest. I wanted to relieve physical and psychological load of the last hard months, but there was no time to admire the beauty of southern nature. Immediately we started studying. While my eye was bandaged, we were engaged in theoretical training. Much attention was paid to deep study of MiG-3, peculiarities of its piloting in battle with air and ground enemy. I taught pilots to determine the distance to enemy planes and to open a killing fire using schemes and the simplest manual simulator. We studied enemy airplanes Mi-109, U-88, U-87, their device, armament, the most vulnerable places, approaches for attack. He took most of the lessons on himself, shared his experience of flying on MiG-3. He paid special attention to the tactics of fighters, developed during 4 months of combat operations at the front. Speaking about combat orders, emphasized the advantage of a pair over a trio. On schemes and models of airplanes, proved to pilots that a wide-open battle order of the group on the front and height better provides search for the enemy, less distracting attention to discretion. It does not constrain the maneuverability of aircraft in the group. Of course, I had to explain why in my recommendations I depart from some pre-war instructions. The young people understood me. The pilots were eagerly drawn to the experience of the frontline soldiers. They knew that soon they would plunge into combat life themselves, and they had to be ready for it. Sometimes we had to leave the subject when we found out weakness in some issue. During the lesson, for example, I felt that pilots confused the terms prudence and search. I could see that it was not accidental. I had to explain to the young pilots that search is the pilot's observation of the surrounding space in order to detect the air enemy, and prudence is reduced to the observation of obstacles and their aircraft on the ground and in flight to prevent collision. Much attention was paid to the study by pilots of the principles of combat in vertical maneuvers and the performance of falcon strike on targets. Already in the first months of the war, this maneuver during the attack gave the greatest effect, allowed small forces to successfully operate in combat. It was reduced to the fact that the pilot, having an advantage in altitude, attacked the target from above, at high speed. Falcon strike required increased skill, the ability to accurately hit the enemy in a short moment. Speed compressed seconds. It imperiously dictated its own terms. In conversations, invariably emphasized these features of high-speed combat, tried to ensure that young people were ready for them. Solving the introductions, setting tasks for the pilots, gave as much time as the real situation in the air allowed. A fighter must accustom himself almost instantly to work out the right decision. Political training was planned every day. Classes often had to conduct and me. It is well known that a commander must have the skills and ability to conduct political work. Pilots at the political training, conducted by a commander who had personal combat experience, listen more attentively to the explanations, are imbued with hatred of the enemy, more clearly understand their tasks to protect the homeland. The press and radio played a great role in political education. The pilots read newspapers in the evenings, listened to radio reports from Moscow. We were better informed about events on the entire Soviet-German front than in combat conditions. Unfortunately, the reports from the front were not happy. With anxiety, we followed the events on the outskirts of Moscow. The flight and technical staff had a growing desire to finish retraining more qualitatively and quickly to join the combat activity. Soon the broken eyebrow healed, and I began to take the pilots out on UT4. Then we switched to MiG mastering at first flights in a circle, and then to the zone. The program of piloting on MiGs was completed with flights for group flying in pairs and in a link. We switched to conducting training air battles. Training went without flying accidents, although not without mishaps. During the training air combat Nikitin with Trud west of Zernograd, a U-88 fell out of the clouds, and the young pilots, chasing each other, did not notice a real enemy nearby. We didn't have a chance to guide them, as lacked a radio station on our planes. I jumped into the MiG standing at the start and took off, but from the junkers saw MiG spinning not far away. The Nazi pilot dropped bombs in the field and the junkers disappeared in the clouds. Not finding the enemy, I sat down, angry at my students. Soon Nikitin and Trud landed and came up to me. "Comrade Commander, the task for air combat completed." "What did I teach you?" "Junkers saw." I asked sternly. "We didn't see any junkers. Otherwise we would have knocked him down," with a smile answers Andrei Trud. AAU fighters. The search for the enemy should be conducted from boarding the plane to the parking lot. In any flight. And you in the air behaved like rattlers. It's a good thing you didn't get shot down. Not one day they had to blush under the ridicule of comrades. Tensely engaged in mastering MiGs, we strived to finish retraining by the day of the Great October Revolution. We listened with great attention, joy and pride to the message about the solemn meeting and parade on Red Square. Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin, who made a speech, spoke about the great liberating mission of the Red Army. He admonished the Soviet soldiers, partisans and partisan women with the words, "The whole world looks at you," as a force capable of destroying the robber hordes of German invaders. The enslaved peoples of Europe, who have fallen under the yoke of the German invaders, look to you as their liberators. A great liberating mission has fallen to your lot. Be worthy of this mission. The war you are waging is a war of liberation, a just war. May you be inspired in this war by the courageous image of our great ancestors, Alexander Nevsky, Dmitry Donskoy, Kuzma Minin, Dmitry Pozharsky, Alexander Suvorov, Mikhail Kutuzov. May the triumphant banner of the great Lenin fall upon you. For the complete defeat of the German invaders. Death to the German invaders. Stalin's speech filled us with confidence in the imminent defeat of the Nazis near Moscow, confidence in our victory. On the very eve of the holiday, the enemy launched an offensive on our front in the direction of Shakhty. He aimed to encircle the troops in the Rostov area, to make a breakthrough to the North Caucasus, to divert our reserves from Moscow. The main blow was struck by the 1st Tank Army of the enemy, replenished with equipment and personnel. In connection with the threat of capture of Sultan Sala, the regiment flew to the airfield near Zernograd, mastered by our group. And immediately after the holiday, we in full staff relocated to the flying site at the village Semikarakurovskaya. From here and began combat work. With the fall came low clouds and fog. They limited the actions of aviation. Air battles were held less and less often. Flying large groups to attack the enemy became difficult, and the situation required active operations. In such weather, the main load fell on more experienced pilots. Flying alone for reconnaissance and small groups to attack the advancing enemy units, we strove to act effectively, to inflict tangible damage, to help our ground troops in repulsing the enemy offensive. In bloody defensive battles, our troops stopped the onslaught of the enemy. Near the city of Shakhty, the fighting gradually quieted down. Hitler's formations failed to bypass Rostov from the north. The enemy began to regroup its forces, especially tank forces. In these conditions, it was very important for the front command to know where the enemy was moving its main striking force, the tank army. But in these decisive days, bad weather pressed us to the ground. Aerial reconnaissance became impossible. One morning of one of these grey days of low clouds, pilots gathered in their regimental dugout. I was scrutinizing the flight map. Now it would be nice to fly alone on a glide path and storm the Germans on the roads. I had a thought. You cannot be afraid of anti-aircraft guns. In such weather, anti-aircraft gunners will certainly behave carelessly. I began to calculate the flight route, characteristic landmarks on it, to determine the roads where it is possible to suddenly reach the enemy columns. I had not yet had time to think it over, when suddenly I was called to the command post of the regiment. I was firmly convinced that I was called for some business, but certainly not for a flight. At the control centre, the regiment commander, after asking me how I was feeling, said, "Our regiment is presented to the guards rank." But now the commander called and said what kind of guards we will be if we do not find the tank army of the Germans. The ultimatum is clear. We must find the tanks. But fly alone. Major Ivanov walked a minute, thinking aloud. All hope now in the command on us pilots, in fact, on those who will be able to act in an extremely difficult situation. Do not worry, comrade commander. I'll try to find it. Take it into account. The weather is very bad. From a neighbouring regiment to perform this mission flew Chaika and I-16. Both pilots crashed, but you're flying a MiG. Having received the route of the flight, on a 2-kilometre map, began to study its characteristic landmarks. I tried to memorize them. The route coincided with the one I thought about in the dugout when I was planning an assault flight. Soon I reported about readiness for departure. Viktor Petrovich checked me and gave me the go-ahead. I was about to leave the control centre as the phone rang. The division commander decided to talk to me personally. Pokrishkin, a German tank army, has gone somewhere from Shekty. We must find it. It's very important for the front command. Understood, Comrade General. I will do my best to fulfill the task, I assured Osipenko. Look at Bolshy Sala and Chaltir. There, according to the data we have, our troops have surrounded the Germans, but the main thing, tanks. It's clear. Permission to execute. Barely took off, didn't gain 30 meters when I touched the lower edge of the clouds. The horizon is closed. The ground can be seen only at a distance of no more than 500 meters. I came out on the Novocherkassk-Rostov Railroad and headed for Bolshy Sily. I fly at a height of 10 meters. I jump out to the village. At its southern outskirts, I notice tanks standing scattered. Their guns are aimed at the village. I come closer and see white crosses on their sides. Enemy. The same thing on the western outskirts. There are a dozen or two tanks here. I can't go to the eastern outskirts of Bolshy Sal. Anti-aircraft gunners must have noticed me, prepared, and will meet me with fire. I'm taking a course along the route indicated to me. I skip along the roads, over the roofs of houses in the settlements. No more tanks. Where are the main forces of the enemy tank army? I should have looked. It's time to lay down on a reverse course. I can't see the enemy. I'm walking along the road. I'm catching up with a column of motorcyclists. They ride calmly, confidently. They hope that in such weather there will be no aviation in the air. I can hear the crackle of dozens of engines running. I take aim and press the throttles. I shoot the whole column with machine gun fire, from tail to head. I see the motorcycles flipping over and flying into the ditches. Good. They won't make it to Rostov. Successful assault attack relieved me of anger for the failure to find the main forces of the tank army. Once again I pass over the outskirts of Bolshy Sal, but now from the east. There, too, with a dozen German tanks. I move aside, turn around and fly over the centre of the village. There are our wagons, soldiers. It's called Surrounded the Germans. Ours are inside the village, and around more than 30 enemy tanks. Apparently it's the advanced detachment of Kleist's army. And where are the main forces? I can't look for them anymore, I'm running out of fuel. and I have to go home. I'm going to Chaltir. There is the same picture inside the village our troops, and around the German tanks. East of it, the defence line. Here our units are fighting with tanks, holding firm. I went back to the airfield. Landed. I reported to the division headquarters that I found more than 50 tanks, surrounded Bolshy, Saley and Chaltir. I feel from the tone from the questions asked by the officer of the division headquarters that they do not believe the data on the encirclement of these settlements. By the middle of the day, the weather improved. The pilots who flew out for reconnaissance confirmed this data. By evening, the fog began to thicken again, the cloud cover decreased. The commander called me to the phone and personally ordered me to fly out again for reconnaissance. The route is the same, and the task is the same. I sat down here at the control center to the table. I thought about it. The enemy is not a fool. He will not do regrouping tanks near the front. Therefore, it is necessary to check the roads in depth from the defensive line. So I did it in flight. At first, I passed along the familiar linear landmarks to Chaltir, from it through Bolshy Saley to Novoshokhtinsk. I did not find any tank units. At the first moment, I felt despair. Where are the main forces of the tank army? If they make a sudden attack, then the price of me as a scout is nil. I'll put our troops under attack. In Bolshy, Salak and Chaltir are the advanced detachments. Somewhere behind them is the main force. I decided to look at a more remote area north and west of the village Generalskoye, although it was not part of the route established by the division commander. Checked the fuel enough. And took a new course. There, not far from the road on the field, I saw deep tracks of caterpillars. I turned around and passed over them. The tracks led me to the forest lanes. In the evening twilight and thickened fog, I saw lights near the plantations. I passed to the side of them. Dozens of fires, crews scattered from them to the tanks, which stood in rows, camouflaged in the forest belt. I estimated by eye more than 200 vehicles. Did you really find them? This is the main forces of the enemy's tank army. Oh, I wanted to hit Hitlerites at that moment. After all, I have 2 unused eras under my wings. The height of clouds 25-30 meters. It did not allow a quick maneuver. I'm turning with a small roll. The wing at the very ground. It took about a minute. But even this time was enough to prepare the enemy anti-aircraft gunners. They met the MiG with heavy fire. I reacted immediately. I dive into the clouds and make a turn to the right. To the left of me, flying glowing shells, Alicon, I guess. They shoot on the course of the entrance to the clouds. Away from the cluster of tanks came out of the clouds and took a course to the airfield. I go home and mentally scold myself for stupidity. With such difficulty I found the tank units and could deprive the command of valuable information. I remembered the same erroneous decision at Orakov. It led to the disruption of an important reconnaissance and the ordeal of being surrounded. No, we must pull ourselves together. Learn to make cold-blooded decisions. Here is the airfield. At the control met with anxiety and joy. Major Ivanov looked at me reproachfully. Finally arrived. We are worried here. You're running out of fuel, and the fog is thickening. What took you so long? You must have found the tanks. I found them. I barely got away. I answered with a grin. Let's report to Osipenko. He's already tortured us with calls. He kept asking about your arrival. The division commander, having heard my message, said in a satisfied voice, "Well done. Consider that I have already presented you for the award of the order." "Thank you, Comrade General." I really wanted to add that I am not fighting for orders, but I decided not to spoil a good mood for myself and the command. The next morning I was raised at dawn. As soon as the weather permits, it is necessary to fly to the wooded areas to find out where the tanks discovered yesterday are moving. I flew at extremely low altitude. Tank columns of the enemy, without camouflage, were moving along the roads to Rostov. The enemy's plan was clearly outlined. He was preparing a blow to the city from the west and north. In Bolshy, Sala and Chaltir there were no longer our units. At night they broke out of the encirclement and joined the defending troops. The way of their exit was marked by abandoned wagons. All this information was reported to the front command. I think that they played a certain role in the development of further decisions. On our front in the middle of November, there were big events. The enemy's tank army with the infantry divisions came up and rushed to Rostov. On the same day, the troops of the Southern Front launched a counter-offensive west of Shakhty. They successfully broke through the defense of fascist troops and began to go to the rear of the main grouping of the enemy. The enemy tank army, which had captured Rostov with heavy losses, was in a critical situation. The enemy began a hasty retreat to a pre-prepared line of defense along the Mayas River, covered by barriers at road junctions and settlements. Unfortunately, aviation units could not actively participate in the fighting. Low cloud cover, fogs and snow charges limited our actions. The enemy's airplanes did not fly at all. General Osipenko often sent me on reconnaissance of enemy rear guard obstacles to search for our cavalry formations operating behind enemy lines. I had to conduct many flights in the most difficult weather conditions, flying blind, at a height of 30 meters or less, to get into snow charges. Only accurate piloting of the airplane by instruments allowed to maintain course and altitude more than once saved me from collision with the ground. Reconnaissance of tank barrages, covered by anti-aircraft guns, even at a strafing flight was not safe. The terrain is open, there are few troops. The enemy anti-aircraft gunners were directing fire. It is difficult to escape from it, although the airplane led, pressing almost closely to the stubble. We had to vigorously go into the overhanging cloud cover, sharply change course, maneuver, get away from the glowing traces of Helicon. And the subsequent exit from the clouds for visual observation at low altitude required great caution. One could easily catch the ground. In such cases, I used a gentle glide exit with a slight roll. This was a safer method than descending straight ahead. Exceptionally difficult weather conditions have developed the habit of carefully preparing for each flight, to be extremely focused, attentive, to show constant vigilance to fulfill the combat task. During those days of heavy fighting near Rostov, each of us constantly thought about Moscow, bitterly experienced the failures in the defensive battle at the walls of the capital. We firmly believed that Moscow would not be given to the enemy. But the anxiety for her did not leave for a minute. In this environment, an important role was played by strengthening the political work aimed at strengthening the moral and psychological state of the regiment's personnel. Everything was done to raise the combat activity of each pilot and technician, to develop initiative and perseverance. This work was effectively organized by the regiment commissar Mikhail Akamovich Pogrebnoy. He came to us to replace Chupakov, who left for flying work in the Reserve Aviation Regiment. Although Pogrebnoy was not a pilot, but the personnel of the regiment treated him with great respect, appreciated him for his attentive attitude to each soldier, for his kindness. His talks, full of vivid examples of heroism, we all listened with great attention. He skillfully brought to the pilots' tasks, emphasized that our successful actions here, near Rostov, are aimed at the defense of Moscow. Crushing the enemy, we are restraining his reserves, destroy manpower and equipment. Well-organized and purposeful work of political staff, party and Komsomol organizations inspired pilots and technicians for more successful performance of combat tasks, storming the enemy columns, making fire strikes. We all realized that every killed conqueror, every burned car, damaged cannon our contribution to the common cause of victory. In the first half of December, the battle near Rostov ended. The enemy grouping was defeated and pushed back to Taganrog and beyond the Mayas River. The enemy suffered great losses, and only additional forces from other parts of the front and prepared in advanced defensive positions allowed Hitlerites to stop our counter-offensive. And what jubilation was brought by the news about the defeat of the main grouping of the fascist army near Moscow, about the rapid advance of our troops to the west. There was much to rejoice about. The enemy suffered huge losses, was thrown back from the capital. Hitlerites had not experienced such a blow for the entire Second World War. Our worries for Moscow were dispelled. The faith in the imminent defeat of fascist invaders, in our victory, became more tangible. After a hard first half year of the war, we all entered the war winter with great hopes. The regiment was relocated to a field site near the town of Shakhty. From here it was closer to act on Hitler's troops. The pilots conducted reconnaissance, stormed the enemy accumulations at the positions, destroyed his transport on the roads. The enemy aviation on our site appeared rarely, and there were almost no air battles. The winter that year was severe. Frost and snow blizzards significantly limited combat activity. The weather dictated its own conditions. We flew in small groups and alone, destroying vehicles with machine gun fire and ERS. It was impossible to use bombs because of low clouds. In one of such sorties on New Year's Eve, our group of 4 MiGs found a small column on the road to Amvrosievka. We suddenly went to the target and attacked it from the start. The strike was lightning fast and accurate. 12 vehicles were set on fire. Among them, 5 gasoline tankers. They exploded, hitting other vehicles. Reported on the results of the assault. The Chief of Staff of the regiment immediately transmitted this data to the division. Suddenly from there demanded to report additional information. Apparently this data was required by the leadership for the final New Year's report. Pokryshkin, the division headquarters demands to report how many enemy soldiers your group killed, Captain Matveev informed me, not letting the telephone receiver out of his hands. We couldn't see from above how many enemy soldiers we killed, I said. I told you about the burned vehicles accurately, and the drivers and servants ran away in panic along the ditches. We had used up our ammunition and had nothing to shoot with. Matveev, having talked to an officer of the division headquarters, handed me a telephone. Here, they demand your personal report. Having listened to the strange question, I replied. On the exact data, we'll have to ask the German command. What a commotion arose. I hurried to hang up the phone. Well, Alexander Ivanovich, this will not forgive you. A few minutes later, Nikandrik and I got a reprimand. And by evening a group of pilots, awarded by the front command, went to the compound to receive awards. Escorting us to Revenki, where the division headquarters was located, Matveev leaned to my ear, quietly said, "Just in case a hole in the tunic in advance do not make. Maybe you'll need it, maybe you won't. What if they cancel the award after your report on the results of the assault to the division headquarters?" It won't be cancelled. The Order of Lenin is awarded by the front commander. I was going to Revenki with joy. I knew that I would meet famous pilots of the division. But I was especially happy to meet Vadim Fadiev. He was a man of great stature. There were a lot of stories about his heroic deeds, prowess, courage and resourcefulness. I really wanted to personally get acquainted with this outstanding pilot. When at the beginning of the war we, fighters, crushed the cavalry division of the enemy in the area of Kodim, we heard rumours about his successful attacks having used up all the ammunition. He tried to chop cavalrymen with the propeller of his plane, drove horses across the field until exhaustion. A recent incident on the Maas reached us. Once during an assault Vadim Fadiev's plane was damaged. He had to land on the neutral strip between the trenches. Vadim managed to run to his own under fire. Our infantrymen surrounded the pilot with astonishment. In an effort to save his plane, Vadim immediately arranged with the commander to attack. "Forward, for the motherland," shouted Fadiev. His powerful bass voice was heard by the whole battalion. The soldiers jumped out of the trench and with shouts of hurrah rushed to the height. This attack was so unexpected and so decisive that Hitlerites did not have time to recollect. Our soldiers jumped into the enemy trench, killed the fascists, captured the height and organised its defence. Vadim Fadiev, with the help of soldiers, dragged his I-16 to a safe place. The commander of the rifle division thanked Fadiev for his help in capturing the dominant height, then invited him to his CP to have lunch and allocated a car to tow the plane. In the division headquarters, I immediately recognized Vadim Fadiev. I approached him and extended my hand in a friendly manner. "Hello, Fadiev. Senior Lieutenant Pokryshkin. I've heard a lot about your heroic deeds and I'm glad to meet you." Sergeant Fadiev. "I've heard about you too. I'm ready to become a friend." So our personal acquaintance took place. It grew into a real battlefield friendship. Fate connected our paths. After awarding, the pilots and engineers were invited to a technical conference. Among others, the divisional engineer spoke at it. He took a very difficult topic, the superiority of our fighters over the Messerschmitts, but spoke unconvincingly, superficially, praised the horizontal maneuverability of the Chaika and I-16, their advantages, touched on the high qualities of the MiGs. In the discussion of the report, pilots for some reason did not show initiative. They had to meet Messerschmitts and Junkers many times in battles and personally experienced the combat capabilities of our equipment and the enemy's equipment. I also decided to speak at the conference. I expressed my views on modern fighter combat tactics, said about the advantages of the MiG in flight speed and when fighting on vertical maneuver. At the same time, he pointed out its weak armament, the absence of a radio station, so necessary to control the actions of groups of fighters. I emphasized the need to have guns on the new fighters, because machine gun armament is not always effective enough in modern air combat. I felt that my performance did not please some of the division leadership. I was veiledly accused of underestimating our combat equipment in the lack of confidence in their aircraft. To argue with people who had never conducted an air battle, had no combat sorties, was simply devoid of any sense. In the evening we were leaving Ravenki. In principle, it was a joyful day for me. I received a high award of the motherland, met interesting people, but there was also a feeling of dissatisfaction. I could not make a deep and convincing speech at the conference. Probably I did not have enough arguments, the ability to defend my views. And the reaction to my speech was not what I expected. But one should be able not only to search for new things, but also to defend them, to speak convincingly and forcefully, so that everyone would agree, yes, it is true. It was the last days of December. In the regiment headquarters was a real emergency. Continuously ringing phones from the division, overturned piles of papers, flared sharp disputes between officers. We, the pilots, knew that they were preparing data to summarize the results of combat operations of units for 6 months. In the regiment evaluated the results of each pilot. On New Year's Eve, everything calmed down. That day by evening in the pilot's dormitory appeared in the adjutant of our squadron, Medvedev. Soon came up to me. I see upset. I couldn't defend your candidacy. What's the matter? First place in the regiment was given to Fidjichev. What's wrong with that? You've flown about 200 combat missions, shot down more than 10 airplanes, and they gave you the second place. Well, why be upset? Are we fighting for prizes? Medvedev, seeing that he was not supported, even confused. I moved closer to him and calmly said, "We will defend our authority in battles. I won't hide it. I had other things on my mind. We had to prepare for tomorrow's attack flight, to open combat operations in the new year. Other pilots were also preparing for such sorties. Before dinner, Major Ivanov advised me, Lukashevich and V. Karpovich to fly early. Karpovich to go to bed early. We realized that in the morning the three of us would fly out for an assault. Almost all the officers of the regiment were gathered for a gala dinner. Viktor Petrovich warmly and cordially congratulated everyone on the coming new year and wished them success in combat. Listening to him, each pilot thought about the past months of the war, about his successes and failures, about his fallen comrades in arms. What will the new year bring to our motherland and each of us? The end of the war was not yet in sight. We knew brutal battles awaited us, and we were ready for them.